So this video is for anyone that experiences knee pain while running, especially those with the label of knee osteoarthritis. In this video, I want to go through 3 really simple exercises that you can do today that should instantly give you a better chance of decreasing your knee pain, especially while running. And this video itself was inspired by a recent article I posted on yourwellnessnerd.com that was inspired by another article that was put out surrounding the 10 biggest running related myths. And the overarching idea of that article, as is the case with this video, is that I want to keep promoting the idea that running is a normal expression of human biomechanics. And if you're someone who has any form of leg pain, especially knee pain while running, it's unlikely to be the running that's caused your knee pain, and rather just the thing that you were doing that exposes some hidden underlying mechanical dysfunction that you took into running. And remember, running is just a lot of repetitious movements. So if you have some weakness or some stiffness in some part of your leg, and you expose that to numerous repetitions over a long period of time, then it may get exposed in the form of something like knee pain. So when we're trying to help people enjoy a healthy, active lifestyle, we don't necessarily want to demonize running as something that can cause injury, but what we want to do instead, and which has inspired this video specifically, is we want to give you a couple of basic things that you can do to try and plug some of the holes that you may not have realized needed to be plugged in order to allow your legs to function better so that when you expose it to the repetition of running, it stands up. So the first exercise you can try if you have knee pain from running is the couch stretch, or a version of the couch stretch. And what the couch stretch does is a couch stretch requires you to get your knee back into the corner of a couch or a seat with your shin vertical. And what we want to get you to do with this is keeping your back straight, trying to hinge backwards from your hip until you can find a potential very intense stretch at the front of your thigh or the front of your hip. And what we want to do here is we want to come back as high as you feel comfortable. And once you've found that tightness, we want to squeeze that tightness as much as possible. So for me, I can feel it at the top of my hip a little bit more. So I'm trying to tense the musculature at the top of my hip at the front here to make that tissue work. Again, it's that contract, relax, that P and F type stretching. We want to squeeze that for 5 to 10 seconds so that when we relax, the muscle gives a little bit, and then you should be able to immediately go a little bit further back into the stretch than what you could before. So the reason why this particular stretch, or stretches like this, are so important for anyone who has knee pain when running is that it attacks some of the hidden potential tightness at the front of your thigh as it runs down into the top of your knee. So if you can imagine that your thigh or your hip flexors are quite tight, it essentially can pull a bunch of slack out of your knee, increasing the amount of tension and load that your knee experiences as it undergoes those hundreds and potentially thousands of repetitions that come along with running. Now, if the couch stretch is potentially too hard for you and you need to pull it back a little bit, then there's nothing wrong with doing a general quadriceps muscle stretch where you bend your knee back. And it's probably better to try this in standing, that once you can find some of that thigh muscle tightness, again, you want to push your foot back into your hand, make that thigh muscle stretch with the view that as you get better, that knee can start to come back further into hip extension to buy some of the potentially restricted tissue higher up in the thigh. If you find that you can't quite nail the hip flexor tightness with your basic quadriceps stretch, then it might be better for you to try a kneeling hip flexor stretch at the same time. Again, same deal, being up nice and tall, just coming forwards until you find some tightness at the front of your hip, with the understanding that you want to squeeze your butt cheeks, squeeze the tissue at the front of that hip, make it work for 5 to 10 seconds so that when it gives, it relaxes and you can go straight away further into that stretch. Now, for obvious reasons, you can put something under your knee. You can do it from a sitting position as well if it's easier for you. But the idea that we want to cover here is that the looser you can make your thigh muscles and your hip flexor tissue, the better the environment is for your knee to function within. So choose the version of that stretch that feels the most comfortable for you to begin with, but ultimately try and get towards that couch stretch at some stage and potentially doing it on the ground. So then the second exercise that I think anyone with knee pain while running should be trying is something to improve your ankle mobility. And not just your stereotypical calf stretches or ankle type stretches that deal with a muscular tightness. We want to make sure that we're exploring some of the deeper joint related stiffnesses, those capsular restrictions that could be in your ankle, and how they might be causing havoc for the structures above your ankle, which is clearly the knee. So what I tend to find clinically is if you're missing those crucial ranges of motion in your ankle, your body will move around those restrictions to complete the task that you've asked it to do. It won't go through those restrictions. So if you can see that your ankle is a little bit more restricted than it could be, then your whole leg might be working around that restriction, compromising everything within that system, which of course the knee sits above the ankle. Then again, it can create an environment that doesn't stand up to tens and thousands of repetitions that you might put it through while running. So again, one of the best ways that I've ever seen to mobilize a restricted ankle, more so than just stretching those tight muscles, as I said before, is to do the banded ankle stretch. And all it requires you to do is to find a band of some sort, place that band below the ankle, depending on where you want to work your mechanics, and putting enough tension on the band and just basically trying to bend and flex that ankle to the end of your range with the band pulling back in the opposite direction. It can help your leg express normal ankle range of motion a little bit more in ways that not having a band doesn't. And again, it's really important to remember that you have the band behind you. As you're coming down into those deeper ranges, if you're running into a stiffness, your leg is going to have the tendency to want to work around that stiffness, as I mentioned before. It can do so by dropping your knee and creating this internal rotation inwards, or you might find that you'll turn your ankle outwards and give yourself the illusion that you're going forwards, but in actual fact, you're doing the same thing with that knees caving inwards, your whole leg's rotating and your arch is collapsing. So we want to make sure when you do the exercise that you've got your foot straight and you want to create that rotation outwards, and we want to go through that stiffness as much as you can, not necessarily caving in and going around it. And paying attention to that specific detail is a really crucial part of trying to understand a lot of knee pain that I see clinically. Is it's not that your knee has failed because it's a bad knee. It's more likely that there's a subtle mechanical issue there that your body's trying to work around that, again, you've taken from your day-to-day life, whether it's heeled shoes, sitting down a fair bit for work or for leisure. You've accrued that dysfunction, you take it into running, which again is really good at exposing that hidden dysfunction because there's so much repetition involved. So the third exercise I want to touch on in this video that will hopefully help improve your knee pain while running is we want to give you something that strengthens the muscles around your knee and your hips to provide more support and stability for the entire leg, to again create a better environment for that knee to exist within while you're running. And a great way to do this is via an exercise called a box squat or just a basic sit to stand. But just to add a little bit more to this exercise, if you can grab a band of some sort or something that can go around your knees, this can really emphasize your hip muscles a little bit more in a way that's mechanically advantageous for your knee while you're running. And the idea with this exercise is we want to make sure that your feet are straight and that when you're coming up and down off a chair or off a seat or off a box, that you're really trying to drive your knees apart as far as you feel comfortable. If you've ever seen the clam exercise where you're lying on your side, lifting your knee out to the side, the clam exercise essentially attacks your hip external rotators, which are one of the main stabilizing muscles of your hip. And by adding a band around your thighs and trying to actively drive your knees apart while you're sitting up and down, not only should you find a really comfortable and tolerable level of fatigue through your thighs, but you might also feel something start to happen in your hips. And again, we don't just want to get your quads stronger on their own. We want to make sure that they're also strong within the context of your leg and stabilized by your hip external rotators and your general hip musculature as well. So how that essentially looks is if you're up nice and tall, keeping those feet straight, actively trying to keep those knees as wide apart as you can, then all I want you to do is to stand up and then sit down, making sure that you're not letting those knees cave in on the way up, but also not letting those knees cave in on the way down. So you want to actively drive those knees apart the entire way up. Don't get sort of soft or relaxed when you get to the top. Same thing when you're coming right the way back down again. And a little secret tip with doing a box squat or a sit to stand is it's really important that when your bottom hits the surface that you're on, don't relax and go soft. Stay active the whole time to get the most out of that exercise, to allow your muscles to work as much as they can for as long as they can to get the most out of this exercise. And the reason why this exercise is one that I would prefer for people to do with knee pain to start with is because it's obviously important to get very specific advice for your aches and pains from a health professional. And whether you can do a squat or a back squat or an overhead squat or a sit to stand, this is often the least aggressive of those squat related movements. And the reason for that is that when you do a box squat correctly, when your hips are coming back and down, it allows your shins to remain relatively vertical, which sort of reduces the amount of forward shear that goes through your knees when you're doing this movement. And it's not to demonize forward shear, because getting your knees out over your toes in a squat position is actually a normal expression of human movement as well. You can't go up and down stairs or go up and down hills without letting your knees travel forwards over your foot. But if you do have some current knee pain, especially when running, and if you run up and down hills or stairs, it's great to take a step back and build some capacity in a safer range of motion, so that as you build that capacity, you can then explore different types of ranges of motion that you may or may not have. And as a generic type exercise to prescribe over the internet for someone who hasn't necessarily seen you move or seen how your knee pain actually feels or functions within the context of you as a human being, a box squat or a sit to stand can be quite a generically safe and comfortable exercise and still very effective at building quad strength and hip strength in that shape without necessarily irritating your knees too much. The other thing that I would suggest with this exercise is, depending on how you feel doing this, you can play around with the height of the surface that you do this from, in terms of making it higher if it's too hard for you and coming down lower as it begins to get too easy for you, just to challenge your range of motion at the same time. So ultimately, if you're someone who experiences knee pain while running, especially if you've been given the label of knee osteoarthritis as well, it's really important to take a step back and try and change the way that you load up your knees, rather than just blame running on its own. So with that being said, thank you very much for watching once again. Check out that article on yourwellnessnerd.com. I genuinely hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.